Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex ideas, often challenging ones, and try to distill them into something useful, something you can really engage with.
And today, we're diving deep into a pretty fundamental question, one that Sigmund Freud really put on the map. The tension between being part of a successful society and, well, feeling individually happy.
Right. We're looking squarely at Freud's argument, especially from Civilization and Its Discontents, that being civilized, being part of the group, actually breeds a certain baseline unhappiness. Why? Because it forces us to clamp down on our basic instincts.
It's a provocative idea, and our mission today is to explore that. If civilization inherently makes us uneasy, maybe even neurotic, as Freud suggested, how does that connect to the ways we try to escape that feeling today? Things like compulsion, addiction.
And crucially, what do modern recovery approaches from trauma therapy, attachment science, even behaviorism offer? Not as a way to ditch society, because let's face it, that's not really an option for most of us.
Right.
But as ways to navigate these demands, to find a way to live within civilization more successfully, more integrated, without needing those destructive escapes.
It's about finding a path to feel okay, even when the world asks a lot of us.
Okay, so let's start with Freud's basic setup. He saw civilized life as this necessary bargain, but a tough one. We basically agree to give up total freedom, the ability to just act on every impulse.
Do whatever we want, whenever we want.
Exactly. We trade that for safety, for order, for collective security. We get a stable world to live in.
But, and this is the kicker, we pay for it. And the currency we pay in, according to Freud, is our personal happiness, or at least a certain kind of intense happiness.
Why? What's the mechanism there?
It boils down to what he called the program for attaining happiness. Naturally, we're driven by the pleasure principle. We want what feels good now. Total satisfaction of needs, urges.
Like instant gratification.
Pretty much. But the external world reality, or the reality principle as he termed it, constantly pushes back. It says, nope, can't have that, or not right now, or you have to work for it. The world just doesn't automatically give us what our pleasure principle demands.
So we're always in this state of managing frustration.
Essentially, yes. Damage control, you could say. We try to get closer to happiness, either by actively seeking pleasure, the positive aim, or by trying desperately to avoid pain and suffering, the negative aim.
But neither strategy is foolproof if the world itself is inherently frustrating.
Right. Freud's point is that the fundamental structure of reality, especially social reality, makes guaranteed fulfillment impossible. It just guarantees constant effort, constant negotiation with these frustrating limits.
Okay, and this leads to his economic explanation of discontent. What did he mean by economic there? Not money, obviously.
No, not money. He used it in the sense of psychic energy, how it's distributed, managed, spent within our minds, and the core conflict, the unavoidable energy drain, centers around eros, the life instinct, the drive for connection, for love, for bonding.
How does civilization mess with that?
Well, civilization's goal is to bind people together in large groups, huge units. Think cities, nations. It tries to do this using what Freud called libidinal ties, a kind of generalized affection, a social glue.
Like love thy neighbor.
Exactly, that kind of broad, less intense connection. But this immediately clashes with a much older, much more powerful way of organizing ourselves.
The family.
The family unit. It's ancient, it's fierce. Its bonds are incredibly intense and focused. Love, in its primal form, wants to stick with the immediate family, the intensely bonded small group. It resists being diluted or spread out.
So civilization demanding this generalized love, this love thy neighbor, is asking us to redirect our limited psychic energy away from those powerful, focused family bonds.
Precisely. It's asking for a redistribution. And that's a huge task for every individual growing up. Detaching some of that intense libidinal energy from the parents, the family, and reinvesting it into the wider social world. It's a necessary step for integration.
And this requires a taming process, right? The individual has to submit.
Yes. To fit in, the ego, our conscious self, operating under the reality principle, has to learn to control, to tame those wilder, more immediate, primal drives. It has to allow the higher psychical authorities, as Freud put it, to take the reins.
And this is where the deep unhappiness, the drive to escape, really takes root.
This is the absolute core of it, because Freud makes a crucial, almost uncomfortable observation here. He says the happiness, the sheer pleasure you get from satisfying a wild, untamed, instinctual impulse
The forbidden stuff
is incomparably more intense than the pleasure you get from satisfying a tamed, socially acceptable version of that impulse.
Wow. Okay, so conforming, being civilized, inherently means experiencing less intense pleasure. That's a tough pill to swallow.
It's a fundamental challenge. It suggests that the most powerful, exhilarating moments, the peak experiences of psychic satisfaction, might actually require breaking the rules society sets up for its own stability.
It's like a psychic cost-benefit analysis where being good costs you the best feelings.
That's a good way to put it. The cost to conformity is the dilution of raw pleasure. And this repression, this constant taming, gives us what Freud called an economic explanation for the irresistibility of perverse impulses.
Why we're drawn to the forbidden.
Because the psychic energy, the potential pleasure payoff associated with that wild, untamed drive is simply stronger, more potent, more available than the energy channeled into something socially approved but, well, less exciting.
So this constant simmer, this tension between wanting that intense forbidden hit and needing the safety of the group, that's the engine of modern unhappiness and the constant search for escape.
For Freud, absolutely. That's the fundamental discontent inherent in being civilized. So Freud gave us the sort of psychic blueprint for why we might feel this constant pull towards the forbidden, this need for escape. Modern neuroscience, though, gives us a look under the hood at the neurological machinery driving that urgency.
Especially when we talk about things like addiction or compulsion, it feels like we're trying to grab that intense satisfaction Freud talked about.
Exactly. And the key player here, we now understand, is dopamine. But not in the way people used to think.
Right. For years, it was just the pleasure molecule. You do something good, you get a dopamine hit, you feel pleasure. Simple.
But it's much more nuanced than that. The research now points to dopamine being central to motivation and learning. It's the brain chemical that says, hey, pay attention, this might be important, go get it.
It's about wanting, not liking.
That's the critical distinction. Dopamine spikes before you get the reward, when pleasure is anticipated. It drives the seeking behavior. It's the wanting system, not the liking system, although they're related.
Okay, that changes things. The chase itself is biologically reinforced, even before the outcome.
We can literally see this. Think about studies on gambling addiction. You put someone in an fMRI machine, and you see this big dopamine surge right before they push the button or place the bet. Not necessarily when they win, often even when they're losing.
The brain is rewarding the act of seeking, the anticipation of maybe winning this time.
Precisely. Same with substance use. Someone addicted to cocaine gets a huge dopamine spike when they see the powder, or even just enter the place where they usually use. The anticipation, the cue, triggers the wanting system into overdrive.
So the brain basically screams, potential reward detected, activate pursuit sequence. And this impulse feels overwhelming.
It feels overwhelming because it is, neurochemically speaking. This maps perfectly onto Freud's idea of the repressed wild instinct breaking through. That intense urge finds this incredibly powerful dopamine driver centered on anticipation, and it can just steamroll the rational, tamed ego that's trying to hold things in check.
The anticipation floodgates open before our conscious brakes can even engage.
Absolutely. Now, let's connect this back to the constant demands of civilization using a different lens behaviorism, specifically Pavlovian conditioning and the idea of inhibition. Taming our drives, as Freud described, requires massive amounts of psychological inhibition.
We're constantly holding back, right? Don't do this, don't say that, delay gratification.
All the time. And Pavlov's work with dogs showed something really interesting about inhibition in the brain. When you create inhibition in one specific spot in the cerebral cortex, say, you train a dog not to respond to a certain bell.
Okay.
That inhibition doesn't just stay put in that one little area. It tends to irradiate, to spread out over a much wider area of the cortex.
Can you give us a metaphor for that? Irradiation sounds a bit technical.
Sure. Imagine you have a damp sponge. If you press down hard on one spot, the water doesn't just squeeze out right under your finger. It spreads outwards, making a larger area damp. Psychological inhibition seems to work a bit like that. Constantly applying the brakes in one area makes the whole mental landscape feel a bit dampened, sluggish.
Like a kind of low-level psychic fog or weariness from constantly holding back.
That's a great way to describe it, a generalized feeling of disaffection, maybe.
Yeah.
And Pavlov found that if you layer different kinds of inhibition on top of each other, like making a dog wait a really long time for a signal, that's one inhibition, and then introducing some distracting noise, another inhibition, the combination could actually make the dog drowsy, even fall asleep.
Whoa. So multiple layers of holding back can lead to a kind of shutdown.
Or at least a pervasive internal drowsiness. Now, think about civilization demanding constant, multiple layers of inhibition from us every day. If that leads to this generalized psychic dullness, this internal fog,
Then the intense hit from a compulsive behavior, that dopamine spike.
could be seen as a desperate biological attempt to find excitation, to jolt the system awake, to cut through that fog. It's an urgent, almost involuntary reaction against the pervasive inhibition demanded by being tamed, a search for feeling intensely alive when everything else feels muted. #3wheat. The architecture of the discontented self.
Okay, so we have the biological engine of the dopamine rush, fueled by anticipation, pushing against the background hum of civilizational inhibition. But let's move inside to the psychological structures. How does this constant pressure, this need to repress, actually shape our sense of self in a way that fuels that need for escape?
A lot of therapeutic models trace compulsive behaviors back to a really fundamental, often pre-verbal feeling of being, well, basically flawed or deficient, not good enough.
The feeling of being not okay.
Exactly. Transactional analysis, or TA, really highlights this with what Thomas Harris called the universal position of early childhood. I'm not okay, you're okay.
Universal, meaning everyone starts there.
Harris argued yes. It's not a conscious thought process, more like a deep nonverbal conclusion reached by age 2 or 3. It comes from the sheer, unavoidable experience of being tiny, helpless, and totally dependent on these huge, competent adults.
Even if the parents are loving and provide everything, it's not necessarily about abuse or neglect.
Not necessarily at all. Think about it from a baby's perspective. You can't feed yourself, walk, talk, control your body. You are fundamentally dependent. Even with the best care, the best strokes, as TA calls them, the overwhelming experience is one of inadequacy compared to the powerful, okay grown-ups around you. That feeling accumulates.
So this deep-seated early sense of I'm not enough becomes the foundation, the wound that later escape behaviors try to soothe or cover up.
Precisely. And once this child part of the personality adopts the not okay position, we develop defenses, what TA calls psychological games. These aren't fun games. They're patterns of behavior designed to manage or avoid the pain of that core feeling.
Like the ain't it awful game you mentioned.
Yeah, that's a classic. People who play it constantly focus on negatives, disasters, complaining. It reinforces their not okay position and gets them sympathy, strokes. But it avoids any risk of success, which might feel terrifyingly unfamiliar or expose their vulnerability.
And this early programming, this not okay feeling, doesn't just stay in childhood, does it? It leaks into adult life, especially relationships.
Massively. Harris points to the marriage illusion. The child part expects love to be this constant state of feeling good and happiness to be something you just chase and find. When reality bites, conflict happens, routines set in those old, archaic, not okay feelings surge back.
And contaminate the rational adult part.
Right. Instead of problem solving like an adult, the person might regress, getting stuck in blame, withdrawal, or patterns learned in childhood to cope with feeling inadequate. They're escaping the present pain by replaying old scripts.
Now, TA puts a lot of emphasis on these internal feelings and early decisions, but behaviorists like B.F. Skinner had a radically different take, didn't they? He basically said, forget the internal stuff.
Skinner's view is a stark contrast. He argued that behavior isn't driven by internal states like anxiety or feeling not okay. He saw those feelings as byproducts, not causes. For Skinner, behavior is determined almost entirely by two things: your genetic inheritance and, crucially, your environmental circumstances.
So if someone is showing addictive behavior or seems disaffected, Skinner wouldn't look for an internal wound.
No. He'd say the problem lies in a defective social environment. Poor parenting, bad schools, oppressive workplaces environments that fail to properly reinforce positive behaviors and inadvertently reinforce negative or escape behaviors.
That completely flips the script. It's not the individual failing to cope with society. It's society, the environment, creating the problematic behavior. Addiction becomes an effect of a faulty system.
It's a powerful counterargument. Freud. The individual is repressed. Harris. The individual is wounded by dependency. Skinner. The individual is poorly programmed by the environment.
But notice the common thread.
The natural expression of the person is somehow blocked or distorted.
Exactly. Whether it's instincts being repressed, the authentic self being wounded, or positive behaviors failing to be reinforced, the energy gets stuck. It can't flow naturally.
Which brings us neatly to the somatic perspective, like Peter Levine's work on trauma. He talks specifically about that blocked, stuck energy. Levine's work is fascinating. He argues that trauma symptoms, anxiety, hypervigilance, dissociation, and crucially, compulsions arise when our instinctive survival responses, fight or flight, are thwarted or interrupted.
Like the classic deer in headlights freeze response.
Or the mouse caught by a cat.
Yeah.
It can't fight, it can't flee, so the massive surge of survival energy mobilized for action gets frozen, locked into the nervous system. If that energy isn't discharged later, it remains bound up.
Creating an internal pressure cooker of undischarged activation.
Precisely. And this intense frozen energy gets tangled up with emotions present during the event: terror, rage, helplessness. Levine directly links this unresolved bound energy to compulsive behaviors, addictions, even perverse behaviors.
Why? How does the bound energy lead to compulsion?
He sees them as desperate, often unconscious, attempts by the system to discharge that overwhelming internal pressure, or at least get some temporary relief from it. It's the body trying to complete a blocked action, but doing it through these repetitive, often harmful substitute behaviors because the original pathway was cut off. It's another angle on Freud's pressure cooker, the repressed impulse, trapped, fueling substitutes. Okay, so we've painted a picture of internal conflict: repressed instincts, dopamine hijacking, pervasive inhibition, core not okay feelings, and trapped trauma energy. It sounds bleak, but the really hopeful part is that modern therapeutic approaches offer concrete ways out, ways to reintegrate these fragmented systems.
To move beyond just managing the symptoms or compulsions and towards something more whole, more like self-leadership, as some models call it.
Exactly. And internal family systems, IFS, is a really powerful framework for this. It has gained a lot of ground recently. IFS sees those troubling urges, triggers, compulsions, not as the enemy, but as the actions of protective parts of our psyche.
Parts that are trying to help, even if their methods are causing problems.
That's the core idea. Every part has a positive intention, even the ones that drive addiction or self-criticism. IFS broadly categorizes these protectors into two groups, trying to manage inner pain, often stemming from younger, wounded exile parts.
Okay, who are the protectors?
First, you have the managers. These parts work proactively to keep you safe, functional, and accepted, often by controlling your environment and relationships. Think of the inner critic, the perfectionist, the people pleaser. They're trying to prevent the underlying pain of the exiles from being triggered.
They sound like Freud's tamed ego working overtime to maintain control and conform.
Very much so. But sometimes, despite the manager's best efforts, that deep pain, overwhelming shame, fear, loneliness breaks through. That's when the second group, the firefighters, jumped into action.
And their job is?
Emergency response.
Mm.
Put out the emotional fire immediately, at any cost. Firefighter parts use extreme strategies for instant relief: binge eating, substance abuse, dissociation, rage, self-harm, compulsive shopping. Whatever works fastest to numb or distract from the overwhelming pain.
So the addiction isn't the core problem. It's a firefighter's desperate attempt to quell unbearable emotional pain. That reframes it completely.
It shifts from pathology to adaptive strategy, albeit a costly one. Recovery in IFS isn't about getting rid of these parts. It's about accessing the client's core self.
The self, what is that in IFS terms?
The self is seen as the inherent essence of a person: naturally curious, calm, clear, compassionate, confident, connected, courageous, and creative. The 8 C's. The goal is for the client's self to become like a good parent, a secure attachment figure to all these burdened parts: the managers, the firefighters, and the wounded exiles they protect.
So you learn to relate to your own anxiety or your addictive urges with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment or fear.
Exactly. Self-leadership means understanding why a part does what it does, offering it compassion, and collaborating with it to find less destructive ways to achieve its positive intention.
Now, if part of the problem is, as Levine says, energy stuck in the body, then talking alone might not be enough. How does the somatic, bottom-up approach work?
You're right. Purely cognitive approaches often struggle with deep-seated trauma because the imprint is physiological. Somatic therapies shift the focus from the story, the thoughts, the emotions, down into the raw physical sensations, the felt sense.
What's the goal there? Just noticing the sensations.
Noticing is the start, but the deeper goal is to create new physical experiences in the body that directly contradict the feeling of helplessness or overwhelm that got locked in during the original traumatic event or period of repression.
So you're not trying to force a catharsis or relive the bad stuff.
No, not necessarily. It's often much subtler. It might involve tracking a feeling of tightness in the chest and just noticing without judgment if it shifts, maybe softens, maybe warms up. Or feeling a blocked impulse, like the urge to push something away, and allowing a tiny, safe movement in that direction.
Giving the nervous system a chance to complete the action it couldn't back then.
Precisely. It's about allowing those small, often involuntary physical responses, maybe trembling, shaking, taking a deeper breath, feeling a sense of expansion that signify the discharge of that stored survival energy. When the body learns on a visceral level that it's no longer trapped, the terror and helplessness associated with that energy can finally resolve. The fuel for the compulsion drains away.
Okay, so once we achieve more internal integration, whether through IFS, somatic work, or other means, we're better equipped to handle the external world, especially relationships. You mentioned, Eric, from distinguishing between falling and standing in love.
Yes, Fromm made a brilliant distinction.
Mhm.
Falling in love is often that initial, intense, almost overwhelming connection, maybe like satisfying that wild Freudian impulse temporarily. It feels miraculous, but it's often based on projection and unmet needs, and it rarely lasts in that form.
So standing in love is.
It's a permanent state, an ongoing practice. Frumvarel argued that love is an art that requires discipline, concentration, patience, and the active development of one's own character, specifically overcoming narcissism and dependency, the roots of that I'm not okay position.
And modern attachment research backs this up, that internal security translates to relationship success.
Absolutely. People with a secure attachment style, often resulting from doing their own inner work, act as that emotionally protective shield for their partners. They can talk about difficult emotions openly and coherently. They don't get easily drawn into destructive cycles like the anxious avoidant dance, where one person pursues and the other withdraws.
So in a conflict, the secure person doesn't immediately resort to escape or attack.
Right. They can stay present, both physically and emotionally, even when things get tough. They avoid what attachment theory calls protest behaviors. Those are the desperate actions people with insecure attachment sometimes use to try and force connection or reduce anxiety. Things like excessive calling or texting, trying to make the partner jealous, withdrawing angrily, threatening to leave. They're firefighter actions, basically.
So the practice, the standing in love, involves replacing those protest behaviors with what?
With conscious, vulnerable engagement. Being willing to state your needs clearly, listen non-defensively, and stay connected even when you feel hurt or scared. It requires trusting the relationship and your partner enough to work through difficulties rather than escaping them. It's the relational equivalent of facing the internal discomfort instead of reaching for the compulsive escape. #TagTagVivi. Cultivating resilience and conscious choice.
Okay, so recovery involves this deep internal reintegration and learning new ways to relate. But it also seems to require developing specific mental skills to handle the inevitable pressures of life without falling back into those old escape patterns. Learned optimism sounds like a key one.
It really is. Martin Seligman's work on this is foundational. Learned optimism isn't about being blindly positive. It's about your explanatory style. How do you habitually explain bad events to yourself? That automatic explanation is what makes you either resilient or prone to helplessness.
And there are specific dimensions to this style, right?
3 crucial ones. First, permanence. When something bad happens, do you see it as permanent? I'll never get this right. This always happens. Or temporary. That was a setback. This situation is difficult right now. Optimists see bad events as temporary.
Okay, permanence versus temporary. What's second?
Pervasiveness.
Yeah.
Do you see the failure or bad event as specific to one area? I messed up this presentation. Or does it bleed over into everything? I'm a failure at everything. My whole life is a mess. Optimists see setbacks as specific, not universal.
Contain the damage, essentially. And the third one is personalization.
Yes, who or what caused the bad event? Pessimists tend towards internal personalization. It's all my fault, I'm incompetent. Optimists tend towards external or circumstantial explanations. The conditions were tough, I need a different approach, bad luck played a part. Importantly, optimists take personal responsibility for good events, whereas pessimists often attribute success to luck.
And the amazing thing Seligman found is that this isn't fixed. You can actually learn a more optimistic explanatory style.
Absolutely. It's a habit of thought, often learned in childhood, but like any habit, it can be changed with conscious effort and specific techniques, often drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy. Learning to challenge those automatic pessimistic thoughts is a core resilience skill.
Which seems vital for navigating modern life, because even as society offers more, it also throws new challenges at us, like the sheer volume of choice.
Ah, yes, the paradox of choice, as Barry Schwartz termed it. This is a uniquely modern form of discontent, directly linked to the progress of civilization. We have seemingly infinite options for everything: careers, products, lifestyles, partners.
Which sounds great, like peak freedom.
You'd think so. But Schwartz argues this abundance actually makes us less happy and more anxious. It turns us from reflective choosers into overwhelmed pickers.
What's the difference? Picking versus choosing.
A picker just scans the available options and selects one, often feeling anxious about whether they missed the absolute best one, leading to regret. A chooser, on the other hand, first reflects on what's genuinely important to them, uses their values to limit the options considered, and then makes a confident choice, maybe even creating an option that wasn't initially offered.
But having too many options makes it almost impossible to be a chooser. The mental effort is too high.
Exactly. The burden of evaluating endless options, the fear of making the wrong choice, FOMO, and the potential for regret become paralyzing. It increases anxiety and dissatisfaction, ironically feeding that sense of overwhelm and maybe even that not okay feeling.
So the very freedom civilization provides becomes a source of the discontent it was supposed to alleviate. How do we cope? How do we become choosers again?
Paradoxically, by limiting our choices strategically. Schwartz argues that to free up the mental energy for the truly important decisions, the ones that shape our lives and character, we need to rely more on habits, customs, norms, and rules for the less significant ones.
Automate the small stuff.
Pretty much. Use routines for meals, rely on expert recommendations for consumer goods, follow social conventions where they don't violate core values. By making many decisions automatic, we can serve our cognitive resources for the choices that really matter. It's about finding freedom through structure, not just from it.
That's a fascinating twist. And when we inevitably stumble, when we make bad choices despite our best efforts, or when life just throws curveballs because Freud was right, suffering is unavoidable.
That's where self-compassion becomes essential.
Absolutely critical. Self-compassion, as researched by Kristen Neff and others, is about treating ourselves with the same kindness, care, and understanding we would offer a good friend when they're suffering or feel they've failed.
It's not self-pity or making excuses. Not at all. It involves three core components: self-kindness, being gentle with yourself instead of harshly critical; common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are part of the shared human experience, not isolating failures; and mindfulness, observing your painful feelings without exaggerating or suppressing them.
How does recognizing common humanity help?
It directly counteracts the isolation that often comes with shame and failure. When you realize, oh, making mistakes is just part of being human, everyone struggles, the feeling of being uniquely flawed or separate diminishes. The pain becomes more bearable, less overwhelming.
Which presumably reduces the need for those immediate, desperate firefighter escapes.
Exactly. It acts like an internal, secure attachment figure, soothing the system when distress arises. And, fascinatingly, this internal state translates directly into better external relationships, better functioning within the civilized world.
How so? What's the evidence?
Studies show that people high in self-compassion are rated by their romantic partners as being warmer, more supportive, more validating, and less controlling or detached, especially during conflicts. Their partners, in turn, feel more secure and satisfied. This contrasts with people high in just self-esteem, which often involves social comparison and doesn't yield the same relational benefits.
So learning to be kind and understanding towards your own internal struggles, your own not okay parts, actually makes you a better partner, a better member of the community.
The evidence strongly suggests yes. Healing that internal conflict, developing that inner secure base through self-compassion, frees up emotional resources. You're less defensive, more open, better able to offer genuine connection and support to others, fulfilling civilization's need for social bonds in a healthy, integrated way, rather than out of obligation or fear. So, wrapping this up, we started with Freud's big idea that civilization demands we repress our wild, pleasure-seeking instincts, creating an inherent discontent.
A baseline hum of unhappiness. Yeah.
We then saw how modern science shows this playing out neurochemically, with dopamine driving the anticipation of escape, often fueled by underlying inhibition and the psychological weight of feeling not okay or carrying unresolved trauma energy.
But the journey didn't end there. We explored how recovery isn't about fighting these parts or escaping society, but about internal reintegration. Things like IFS helping us befriend our protective parts through self-leadership.
Somatic work helping discharge that trapped energy by allowing the body to complete its responses, and attachment science guiding us towards standing in love, practicing secure connection rather than compulsive seeking or avoidance.
And cultivating skills like learned optimism, conscious choice-making, and especially self-compassion gives us the resilience to navigate the world's demands without resorting to those old destructive escapes.
It brings us back to a fundamental question about what it means to be a healthy, functional member of society. Alfred Adler, who initially followed Freud but then broke away, had an interesting take. He said the neurotic person strives for personal superiority, dominance over others. But the psychologically healthy person strives for a superiority that includes the welfare of others, what he called social interest.
That feels relevant. Freud himself, though, kind of landed somewhere else, didn't he? He suggested that the survival of culture itself becomes a new value, something we have to factor in alongside our personal happiness and social connections.
Right. If the widespread neurosis and disaffection caused by repression potentially weaken the entire cultural fabric, then the individual act of healing takes on a larger significance.
And that leads us to the final thought we want to leave you with today, something to chew on. If Freud is right that civilization requires instinctual repression, and that repression breeds neurosis and the need for escape,
Then what is the ultimate contribution of your individual journey towards recovery? Towards finding integrated, healthier ways to live within society without needing those escapes.
if the behaviorists like Skinner are partly right, and the faulty social system contributes to the problem, does the personal act of tending to your own inner world, your not okay parts, your trauma energy, your attachment patterns, does that act of integration actually strengthen the whole cultural fabric for everyone?
Could it be that genuine self-care, this deep internal work of integration and compassion, isn't selfish at all? Could it, in fact, be one of the most highly civilized, most pro-social contributions you can make in a world struggling with the discontent Freud described?
Is healing yourself the best way to help heal the collective? A provocative question indeed.
Something to ponder as you navigate that ongoing tension between your own inner world and the demands outside. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.